Fauré's Requiem is not just Fauré's Requiem, but what it is a meditation on death, and at the same time it's a meditation with the exception of Libérame movement, it's an acceptance of death rather than a rejection and then an acceptance. It is have to do with Fauré himself, organist of the Madeleine Church, his father's death, his church schooling for music, church musician at the, in Paris when he was sent from South France where he was born, and he studied at the Niedermeyer school. So he was prepared to be, he grew up as a church musician, and he didn't write only that, of course, but everything, if the Requiem in Fauré's music represents his stature in humanity. There is a noble attitude in terms of the nobility of soul. At the same time, there is a respect for the elders, because the music is very, you can call it old-fashioned, and it's tonal and modal, it's not atonal. It's traditional, but it's eternal at the same time, with Bach or Mozart. Of course, they are in their own time frame, and you can decontextualize them, but they are who they were when they were. But the universality that comes out of their work talks to us in the present as if it's now, regardless if we can chronologically time frame them. And once you take them off from their own time period, you realize that the music itself talks to us directly, to our soul, and specifically so when it's a soulful music, because the Requiem is the Mass for the dead. And regardless if one has this belief or one doesn't have this belief, I don't think the music is reductive in a way. The music is transcendent, transcending our own humanity, and brings us through this reflection over death to think about the ultimate meaning of life, and which is life, love, being, bringing, giving, sharing, and ultimately dying, which is not of our power as humans. And if we think and we can reflect over it, and by reflecting over it, we can rise ourselves above our condition, that of mortals, I mean. It doesn't make us as immortals, but it makes us better humans in the sense of sharing. And I think that there's nothing wrong with owning, but it's also meaningful to have something to share, values, thoughts, being, what we acquire through life, or what we receive from our elders, and what we transmit. And I find that the Fauré's Requiem really embodies this, is a confluence of the tradition and of the thinking forward. In that sense, the opening of it has this Bach-like organ pedal, we would call it, on D, on C, on B flat, and on A. The traditional chaconne, passacaglia, lament, bass line. Over and over, going from the tonic down to the dominant and restarting. La Folia de España. The lament of the death of Dido in Purcell's opera. Chromatically, invitation towards, let us get together to pray, to reflect, to think about it, to be together in the communion of the spirit of the thought of death, either because of somebody who we are bearing or because of our own destiny in mind, and combined. But the idea of opening with this traditional descent of the triton, of the triad, of the tetrachord, is played here in Fauré's introduction in very long values. It's triple whole note. So we have 12 beats, and with slow beats. And then the chords that are sung by the choir are D minor chord pianissimo, as if they come from down under in profundis, deep out from our souls. The basses are played very powerfully, as if calling us towards death, and as humans we sing in echo of this call and rising above that call. At some point, therefore, towards the middle of this page, the choir rises into the high expectation in relative major of F major, after it started with, but it doesn't go right away to the dominant. It will, but first it tries to go high when the bass line drops down, as if this inevitable, which it is, destiny of humanity, and then the humanity tries to rise before to drop, to bring to something, to build, to construct, to organize, to hope, to share, to express, to breathe, to sing. And when they sing Requiem aeternam in the opening notes, one note, one syllable, Requiem aeternam, I am mimicking it with my mouth, the Latin words, just like a choral conductor would do, facing the choir when the conductor is with his back to the audience. Of course, I don't have a but imaginary choir to sing to, since I play the Fauré Requiem on the piano myself. But I hear inside the Requiem. And then when it rises on the B flat major chord, it looks perpetua and light forever. And that comes in the major, relative major. It looks. And even if one doesn't have to say, and one doesn't say the words when one plays it on the piano instrumentally, and one knows the Latin words of the Mass of the Requiem for the dead, and we talk about perpetual and light and hope and life after death. These are the things of the belief. These are the things of the faith. But beyond that, the piano playing brings not enough of the decay resonance of a cathedral, of a church with the choir and the ensemble of human breath singing combined into these opening chords, even when they're held in pianissimo or they are broadcasted, so to say, through the church acoustics to the relatively high relative pitch major. So when Fauré reaches the dominant, he has gone by this surprise modulation, or passing by rather altered degrees. And in D minor, we arrive ourselves to the piece being in D minor. so far away, we are into G flat major, which would be inharmonically though next door. But we could have gone escape from there. But he returns in D minor right away after the first surprise modulation, or hint of modulation. At the end of the movement, which is the I have to make sure I play the correct place I want to show you. At the Agnus Dei's ending, he returns to the introduction. Through the 6th degree, D flat, F, A flat, the A flat becomes a G sharp, and you're back into the dominant of D minor with the harmonic change of D flat becoming C sharp. Cold, warm, distant, close by, frightening, reassuring. Probably any of these are lame terms and totally cheesy. I agree and I accept it. I self-criticize myself for just trying to explain them like that, because they mean so much more. But they mean also what they are themselves, which is the color of the atmosphere, of the temperament of the harmony. So he treats twice this introduction within the course of his Requiem. But after the original arrival on the first pages and dominant, we have then the offertory. Before the offertory, we have the Kyrie eleison. And the Kyrie eleison, the Christe eleison, and the Kyrie eleison are the meaningful opening of the Mass words about the Lord. And the fact that Kyrie, of course, Lord in Greek, ancient Greek in Latin, it becomes, after the slow dropping lament, long values, baseline introduction with surprising quasi modulation, and then is almost magically, by the inharmonic modulation, returns back to D minor. Then is very serene, no more dramatic modulations, at least not for a long time. And this ostinato of the moving melodic bass, reminiscent of steps, I find them to be extremely compelling to the imagination, like as if they're the monks walking and singing, chanting rather than singing, like the Gregorians and all. But the bass line has this kind of melodic movement of the bass. Mademoiselle Boulanger, who was Fauré's student, taught me always to think myself when I compose, already child as I was then. She said Fauré's melodic lines are walking basses. You always have to think, Emile, composing yourself, moving melodic basses and not establishing and staying long time on one. concept of the melodic bass rather than the harmonic roots bass for the chords, but being also melodic, while the melody in the chant of the Kyrie eleison, Kyrie, and then the lament expectation from the alto part, the viola. Pleading and returning down to the dominant. And the walking steps of the bass and the melody of the song of the Kyrie. And it can be repeated forever. It's almost like I was going to say minimalist music. It's not right to say that. To do with the constancy and the flow of the steps going always forward and chanting the Kyrie eleison. I shouldn't be singing since I transcribed it, but I hear it in my head, as I'm sure all of you who heard it with the choir and not reduced to the piano. And this kind of sense of repetitivity, I think, is like the chant, the psalm singing is it's reassuring after this abyss on which the dominant brings us and stops in the introduction, like the question mark of why, when, and where, like the famous questions we wonder about our existence, right? And all of a sudden, it could appear austere as it is, but in fact it's very reassuring. When you have the middle section of the Christe, it's a different mood, is hope and a little bit more of a rising. There's a special quality of legato to find on the piano where you imitate the singing, overlasting under the next note and after the preceding and the next. But at the same time also having a capacity of rising as if you do when you sing and you withhold air and then you sing it when you in fact exhale the air, and here the music at the same time rises when you exhale. So you feel like it's a long line phrase that unveils, unrolls, or rolls out itself like wings. I can see them. And taken by the lower voice. Sorry for this note. And then again the dramatic contrast of the opening choir, relative major F F major and the resigned D minor. But why? But no. Or modulation, F sharp minor, forte, dominant in augmented fifth piano. And then again, one of Fauré's modulations harmonically, the D flat of the half seventh diminished diminished fifth chord, and then augmented fifth dominant chord, and a tonic. It gives that color of severity, of darkness, but at the same time of inner light, rather than dark and expecting to be worried, oh my God, why am I dying? Why did I die? Why does he die? Why does this loved people die? Why is life unfair and people die? I think a lot of these things come in mind because it is a reflection of her death by essence, but at the same time you have these harmonic progressions that bring you a sense of revolt or acceptance, of hope and despair, or acceptance and then no more despair. I think a lot of these kind of feelings come through the harmonic colorization, or we can call it atmospherization. I don't know what is the right word. I don't pretend to be a scholar, but I feel it when I hear it, and I try to play it through my reduction on the piano here rather than only singing or wording it. To the Kyrie in the A prime. What is very incredibly moving for me is that the walking bass of the Kyrie in the beginning in 4 beats, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and the melodic moving bass, always around D as a tonic, and going up and down and around, and always returning to it like fate. It can never be escaped. And then sometimes the dominant and back to the tonic. And here in the chordal revolt, and the contrasting acceptance of the piano, the bass is in dotted rhythms. Instead of being in steady, equal quarter notes. The sense of the pulse of the heartbeat, pop pom, pop pom, pop pom, pop pom, unevenly like the heartbeat, and I think it makes it very close to humanizing the inhumane fear in front of death. Therefore, making it more acceptable for us with our heartbeats. The pulse, pom pom, pom pom. Just to know if Fauré even thought about these analogies, musically speaking, perhaps not at all. And he didn't have to. I don't think it's necessary either to, perhaps per se, but it's in the conversation, it's part of the reflection that the music brings us to. Perhaps we don't have to explain everything what music brings us. Perhaps the composer doesn't have to explain all the details of the processes, how, way, one, way and where and how, and all these modulations, the chromaticisms, the laments. Not everything is just pre-formatted as it could appear when you explain it. Oh, this is the lament bass, oh, this is the that. But it's not just that, it's through that, but not it. and then it brings us to feel like we've heard it perhaps in other pieces of music because it's traditional writing, but at the same time I think it's very personal to him and to us. The way he uses this ambivalent tonal modal combination and these striking modulations like Schubert often does for the effect that he obtains through these inharmonic changes of mood that are immediately on the other side of the harmonic color, and that you thought you were so far away but in fact yet so close. I think it's also to do a lot with this analogy of the endlessness of this depth of the afterlife, and then so close, but at the same time not yet, and we feel like we are holding on our life before we go for the after, whichever it is, and whatever it is. And here, this dotted rhythm of the heart pulse, which I think it is, but perhaps he didn't even think of it. But it's in the eye of the beholder, in the ear of the beholder, in my case, in the heart of the beholder. And this is the modal tonal combination. F major is the third degree of D minor descending minor. This is the combination of the two, the modality, which is more intemporal, and the tonality, which is more temporal in the sense of 19th century, close to when he wrote it, which was the 19th century. No. So we have the F major, relative major, modal minor, and then the perfect cadence with the leading tone, tonal, and then chromatic, rising chromatic. For the final perfect cadence, but rising before. Can explain it, if not he wouldn't have written it. So therefore the depth of the inspiration, the meaning to our souls is in the music itself. It doesn't need me to explain it. Far from there. I have the image of my teacher, Mademoiselle Boulanger, conducting this. She was the first woman to conduct orchestras and choirs in New York, London and other places, and that she didn't bring out for her own shining as an endeavor, as a gesture. It was always bringing Fauré's music to the audience beyond the church, in the concert halls of the symphony orchestras in question. And I think it was always serving the work of her students, of her sister, of her master, in this case, Fauré, maître. And we, of course, sang it for her own funeral, since it's in a way symbolized her musicianship as, again, the transmission, the receiving from the elders and the transmission to the next. And I felt in 99, 20 years after her death, in 79, that I had to play it on the piano, since I'm a pianist. And not that the marvelous choir writing, so antique and so modern at the same time, of Fauré, and the voices themselves being the translation of our breath, the stage of soul for the ancient Greeks, psyche. All these are not heard on the piano, since his hammer is hitting the reverberation or the resonance on the string. But I still believe very much that it has that kind of depth even on the piano, of evocation of the voices rather than the voices themselves, of evocation or of sort of like recalling the beloved words of the Kyrie eleison through the walking bass. It becomes like an appropriation in some ways, as all interpretations are. In this case, it's a transcription on top of being an interpretation. Does it belittle it? Perhaps. Does it reduce it? Possibly. I think it just gives it another dimension, perhaps a bit more austere because of the lack of orchestral colors and of the human voice singing colors. But at the same time, it also brings through the piano and the impactful articulation of the sound through the resonance on the hammer, on the string. It gives also a sense that life is in that vibration that is decaying. And the more you delay that decay, the more you hope for life, beyond the expectation of eternal or not, but your own life of the day, of the moment, of now, for which you have these emotional feelings of compassion, of empathy for the others, for death, for why, for life, for everything, for love, for connecting, for transmitting, for bringing. All these things which we do while we burn on life like a candle. And then we don't want it to be all finished because we want to bring more, or perhaps receive also more. And in many cases, some do more than one or the other. But regardless, I'm not here to judge, organize, or expect to try to find any kind of cheap parallel between what it means and that. I mean, obviously the heartbeat and the dotted rhythm in the bass, I think, is a little bit far-fetched because probably he didn't think of it, and who is to know? But that's what it means to me, and I share it with you. But I think it's better to share it also silently. And so what I'll do is play for you the opening section of the offertory, the second movement, without to explain first and or at all after either. Perhaps just reflect rather than explain, because that would be so presumptuous to explain what doesn't need or can't be explained, but felt, heard, and meant. And regardless of what, even if it's different for each of us, the way we receive it. Just like the word, the meaning, the sense of the word, and the sense of the sound, and the sense of the harmony, or the sense of the dialogue, and the sense of yearning, hurting, going forward, and hurting and hoping. All these things are very clearly indicated in this enigmatic in the beginning, and then very heartwarming melodic line expression. I not tell you all these things? I'm holding back because I don't want to disturb the beauty of the music. The interrupted silences that the music is. The dialogue between a hope and a second hope and a third hope. And then the peaceful singing. And this time the 16th notes accompany soothing. So much more than the opening chords or the bass melodic quarters or the dotted quarters eighth note heartbeat. Here we have the eternity of the flow, of the continuousness. Things just go on and cannot be stopped, even if the syncopation of the bass tries to interrupt, but the song chants. It doesn't even sing, it repeats the words on, rather the notes are repeated for the different syllables. Without any accompaniment or bass note, just the hold of the thought. And you feel like this is going to blossom and flourish, and all these voice leadings will just open their arms like the love of humanity or the creator, the love for the... It's also universal and humanistic without to be just one or the other, or I don't know what it is only, but I think it is beyond only what it is. It's all what we want it to be, obviously, in the eye of the beholder, but it gives that sense of elevation of our spirits, of our moods, of our hearts. And the music expresses this by dropping in the beginning deep and then rising, and you feel like no matter what, you're trying to reach for some higher ground in your existence. You hope to reach some, it's not the heavens that you try to keep, but the height of the expectation of our own selves. And when you hear the arrival in the middle of the priest singing his homily, and you have every harmony stops and you only hear the solo singer. An accompaniment of these shadow syncopations, chromatic. It's eloquent melody, so bringing out all the expression of our humanity. See, rising it up on the third as if we need to rise with it, so the message rises us. Modal and tonal, and managing to be dark and somber even in major. And the breath death of the long value without decay. The plagal amen cadence, of course. And then he has this moment where you have the impression, you hear the procession of the monks from far away rising. Proclaiming their faith. Open, not closed. And the priest picking it up in the melody. So aria, chorale, chorale, aria. Rising brings us to the sense of plenitude, and it's alone, just the voice. And the harmonization again between F major and D minor with the Picardy third. And the chant comes back deep from inside. This polyphony is like the ancient music, but eternally ancient, therefore so modern, because present. Rising or is dropping, it has it. We hear it. It's just that it has some kind of symbolic motion movement for every gesture he does between hope and despair and resilience and staying there. At the end of this offertory is just like incredibly close to a chorale by Bach, but not, but Brahms, but not, but more and different, but not, but yes, but all of that, as if it englobes a lot of these by simple motions of texture which move by singing steps. And therefore this polyphony, just in this luminous major, it's the elevation beyond the expectation or the drop of hope and sadness and all that. We are already in that yes, luminous solar level of transporting our souls in a place where we feel like we are no more connected only to that existential pain. And he has this color, for lack of a better word, of solar light, almost like as if through the stained glass we see the light come, like the cathedrals which were built to reflect the light, which would be God's creation, and therefore the light is the soul for us. All this connection of the senses for our capacity to translate them into our symbolisms. And he has that in the Pie Jesu movement also, this 4-part chorale. With modal well-being and not tonal tension. Sounds very medieval or Renaissance even. And this the final illumination highlighted by the enlightenment is at the In Paradiso movement at the very end. So he brings us from the darkest abyss to this highest luminosity of our hope for our soul to prevail over these livelihoods. My vocabulary misses a lot of subtleties, and I rather try to explain them through the piece by playing it, and perhaps try to reduce my explanations, which cannot reach even with my little less with my vocabulary being not very rich, the levels of what it suggests musically. The Sanctus is the third movement. It has these two intertwined harps in the orchestration that heavenly kind of sound like music from what we imagine heaven would be. And then the chant of the Sanctus. And then the decorative, almost like angelic floating part over it. A bit like Bach's chorale, Jesus, Joy of Man's Desire. There's this and the chorale. In the word, and the word is in the chorale, and therefore in these long values, which here are also sung in large values. And this in distant echo, angelic line, which is a contrapoint that is there, but not involved with the melody, and then the harp. Harps, bringing that timelessness of the flow of time with the 16th notes, that wavy again feeling that we had earlier in the offertory. And so it combined goes like this. And then the Pie Jesu. I like to think it has to be played spoken. Pie Jesu Domine, and not melodically sung on the piano to imitate voice by the syrupy sweetness, rather by the spoken eighth note of the syllable. Jesu Domine, the clarity of the elocution through the acoustics of the resonance, of the reverberation in the church. They say Fauré himself wanted to have a child sing the soprano part without the vibrato that is more natural to the soprano woman's voice. But I think it can be sung beautifully by both, included on the piano, at my humble opinion. Of course, I use a little bit of effects, which is easy to do on the piano. For once, I'm just a little bit not as austere as I should be for the piece, of the harmonization in B flat major or in G minor. And so the same notes. And he, Fauré, translates that very well in his subtle, different harmonization on the same melodic notes, holding on this Ré, Fa, Ré, Do, Ré, if you speak it in solfège terms. And then the comment of the choir, very distant, as if inside the echo of our souls. Cradling, and finally back to the inevitable D minor. Acceptance. So Plagal is obviously 4-1. This is 2-1 by the passing tone. Basically, it's all modal, it's all ancient, it's all not fully tonal, but it doesn't matter. And the harmonization. It's important for the piano transcription to try to play the under parts under the melodic line a little bit more in the shadows, but legato from close up under the escapement. And follow them. Their own life. Nothing is lost, everything is beautiful, meaningful rather than beautiful, but also beautifully meaningful, meaningfully beautiful. While the melody is lit. And then these underline voices of the SATB for the rest of the choir, alto, tenor, bass. Second time, in the conclusion, extension, needless to say more, needless to say anything. The fifth movement, the Agnus Dei, starts as a soothing moment of what we can call in melodic, perhaps even in analytical music terms, pastoral. If I may just say one thing, I feel so terrible to interrupt his music by talking, and I'm trying to not talk as much. So yes, I did speak to you, didn't I? But without the words. I was voicing one, I was voicing another, I was voicing the bottom, I was the singing bass, the melody with the decorations, and the harmonized long values in hemiolas. So beautiful in the inner voices, the eloquence of the beauty of the cultivated inner voices. Like a good craftsman, everything is well crafted. There is nothing utilitarian or something more to be shown and something to be held back. Of course, on the performance, I try to bring it in colors, and of course in shades and in layers, and in voicing, therefore, out and in, forward and inside. But at the same time, it's all of it there, and it's in a flow. It's not just by chords. It is the harmonic progression through the voicings of the layers. And you follow the alto in the old bottom of the right hand, if you want, for the piano, rising, while the tenor singing his own song. So if I play just the inner two voices, they're already by themselves incredibly rich in beauty, in juicy feeling. And that is nothing but the two outer voices. Having their own lives, beautifully, graciously, fluidly this, like conversing with each other in gentleness. In 3/4, which is one of the first times we have that in the piece, is the beginning. It gives a sense of lightness, and of course with the hemiolo on 3/2, a sense of larger flow. But combined, all this introduction of bars are before the voice enters to tell the story of the Agnus Dei, or what it means rather. Through the melody. Today is mostly an opportunity by replaying sections to re-enjoy them, re-hear them, re-taste them, re-feel them, immerse ourselves in them. By the repetitivity we get to get more deeply in it, not just because of a learning process, but also because of this kind of process where we become the piece. It sort of like enters in us, and in performance you hear it once, obviously, through, and that is supposed to be the case because the words, because the music and the way the things are constructed in the structure of the piece itself. Don't pretend to say it's better because we repeat it, but it takes more of the, we take the time to appreciate what we hear. The melody, the alto, the tenor, the bass. Of course, in interpretation you have to make a choice, which to bring, which to hold, how to combine, which to shadow, which to forward, how there's light and darkness, but not so much only for the effect, for the sake of it. It's more about finding a way to organize this beautiful, after all, he did organize it by organizing it as he did. The flow of the voices with the organization of the harmonic progressions which result from it, they almost blossom out of the melodic lines of the contrapuntal polyphony in everything he does. That is why it's so timeless, because it's not Gesualdo, but it is. It's not Victoria, and it is. It's not the great masters of the past, but it is. But also, and it is, but at the same time it is ours while we do it. And I still think that its modernity is in its intemporality rather than in its audaciousness. But it does have audacious, but, not but. It also has audacious modulations. Was full of dark reminiscences of the same melodic line, which is so heavenly. The 16th notes, tiara, sol, fa, fa, mi, re, do, si, do, la, mi, do, la. And these 16th notes become in the low register in the middle section so fearful and so brooding and so intensely agitation for our own souls. And then he manages within not even 1 or 2 bars to go out of this and that to perform is very difficult, because you want to stay longer to do the transition in more proportionally, so to say, transitional moments, like little by little. But he's brutal for that, and I think it brings a sense of dark and light that is just unbelievable. how can you not express the sense of yearning, of hoping, of fighting against the odds to prevail after all these dark harmonies, which really brings us to our inner fears. And then prevail through the chromaticism to the denatural. That famous opening with the lament dropping of the Chaconne Passacaglia bass of the upper tetrachord of D minor, D and C and B and A, which is how he goes back to the opening, which I introduced earlier, as an echo to that opening, to finish the, or end, or conclude, or deeply construct, rather, the ending of this very, remember the beginning? Light-hearted, almost pastoral 3/4 of the Agnus Dei, and through the reintroduction of the dark chords, he goes back to the opening, but this time in the opening of D major key. In elevation. And the last two movements, Libera me and In Paradisum, if you have felt already an emotional and spiritual cradling first, and then a roller coaster of emotions from the depth of the darkness to the lightness of the above solar light that we hope or connect to hope and afterlife and all what we hope for the beloved dead who we care for, and humanity at large as well. The last two movements are the perhaps most dramatically contrasting of all these. Since I told you in the beginning, it's a meditation on death is an acceptance rather than a rejection and then an acceptance. Well, Libera me is perhaps where you need to free yourself from that fear of death, and then you accept it in the In Paradisum. And therefore it's not an operatic, dramatic human versus finitude of one's own condition fight. But it could be in part, and it is probably, because that's what we all experience every day as humans, that finitude, it's the end of it, and we don't want it, or we hope it, or we prepare for it, or we fear it, or sometimes it comes unprepared and all that. I cannot even start speaking about this because I don't have the vocabulary for that, but I can express it in my passionate understanding of how this music corresponds very deeply to the human nature's seeking for our own destiny and her own hope for our humanity-ness. That's what I think of it more. Of course, everybody can think their own version of what it means, the elevation of the spirit, and I don't want to appear like I am sidetracking this to one direction or another. The universality of the music is to be open, is to take everybody through his music and say, come, or be together and just take a moment to be humans among humans. And I think in the Libera me, the most striking pulse, more so than the opening heartbeat of the dotted rhythm. Here is the rhythm that has 3 beats in 4/4. That means one missing. And that in the rest is almost as if the heart closes and then releases the blood and then pumps in and out. And I think this perhaps a little bit too literal imagination of mine about it. helps me to understand that the syncopation, this ostinato, but syncopated ostinato, it's not just, and it's not either a dramatic overdotting that it could be, because then it becomes even more appealing to this human psyche of the alerting of what happened, or the repeated note. He maintains it into only the rhythm and the capturing of the note in the rest, inside the silence, as if the silence captures the meaning of the note that we heard. So the silences interrupted, music interrupts silences, silences interrupt music. It's famous that Mademoiselle Boulanger, at least famous to me, that she told the contrabass, the double basses in the orchestra, "Gentlemen, I depend on you for this movement," because she wanted them to give an accent, literally impulse more than accent, or accent more than impulse, on what is in fact the fourth beat of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. But in fact, being 3 beats in 4/4, starting on the first, therefore on the fourth, it is a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 also. And so this ambiguous combination of syncopation or delayed beat combined is probably both. Keeps that sense of inner intensity, as if that is our inner soul's search, our yearning, our brooding, our holding towards what we want to go with belief. We hold on it, and it's paradoxic that we hold on that silence. And the release of the 3 notes are almost the release of the intensity of the silence. And 2, 3, 4, and 2, 3, 4. And this is only the bass line, the ostinato syncopated, obstinato, I'm gonna say. And then the melody, liberame, free me from my fears, or my human condition. It's very powerful and simple, but at the same time it's just literally dropping deep inside us right away. And then the rest of the harmony is held in 3-part chords. I mean triads, obviously at 3 parts, sometimes 4. But in echo to the melody of the singer, the soloist, singing it. Some of the harmonies meet dissonances that are painful, and some releasing it in the tonic after the tension of release of the dominant. And under, dry, and with the non-pedaling rest. You don't want to hear and then holding with the fingers, the finger pedal in the right hand. I must say that the percussive personality, or I was going to say nature of the instrument, the piano, prevails very clearly through this intention of his in the left hand, dry, sort of heavy pizzicatos. The melody is hanging, and the harmonies are coating the melody but in distance. very long statement of the singer. Is a very long statement. It's a run-on sentence. It's a search of an explanation of oneself towards the horizon line, which is always further. And you don't do small sub-phrases, but you stay until the very end. You stretch in literal stretch terms while the call of death or the heartbeat of whatever one can say, and one shouldn't perhaps, because after all it belittles it. And the middle section is divided into almost what I consider something like nuns praying, very distantly and very intensely and very emotionally and very intimately. Without that ostinato in the bass. And now the ostinato moves into the trumpet or the brass. In a 6/4 that goes a little faster than the 4/4, but still by group of 3. But this time it becomes more urgent because of the rhythmic stretto. I think the bass line deserves better legato. I'm sorry for this. Rise very longly. The master of the sequences, Bach, and not only before him and still through after him, but Fauré, my God, does he love these loves it too, and Brahms loves it too, and we can say, yes, I don't mean to say it's different, better, or unique, but I think in the way it is constructed it is, in the way things come in the way the bass is dry and interrupted and quicker and inquisitive. And then it becomes in the right hand and in the higher instruments, but the legato in the bass movements. Forget when José Boulanger always told me the movement of the bass, the melodic movement of the bass, and even when it's in log values. There's something about solfeging that helps so much to say it before you can even sing it, play it, hear it, or even understand it. And it helps because of the syllable system with the vowels and the consonants. Fa, la, sol, fa, la, do, re, sol, si, re, mi, la, do, mi, fa. Even if it's not words of the song, of the choir, of the text. But I find that it's harder to do it in G, D, G, B, D, E. It's possible. I have to train myself. A, C, E, F. But whichever way you say it, you have to first be able to say it perhaps before you hear it. You can write it and feel that chromaticism by the motion that is indicated in the dotted halves, and then here. I'm dropping in the appoggiaturas of the lament of the right hand or the top parts, and in the rising chromaticisms that are so much more in the hope in the two hands, so you have a chromaticism that goes in the two directions. sharp major moment. Like a moment of heaven, almost like you hold your breath and you see something and then you drop chromatically back to it. Away from it, so that when the last call comes, you hear this pum, 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 pum again, rhythmicity that is so striking for the Libera-Mez bass line, with the drums that become even more drastic because then the call is even closer. The tremolo of the drums and the dotted rhythm, which is no more dotted. The harmonization of the brass length, the dominant tonic, diminished seventh, leading tone seventh. And the choir sings what originally the single solo singer sang in octaves. Harmonies now are dropped to be exactly like the bass with the rhythm pum 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 pum. This way the legato and the detached non-legato are the dialogue between the two entities. Chromatic whole note descent of the triton, the devil in music, dooming you to your condition and your expectation with the choir singing the original song of the single singer, trying to elevate yourself and the rhythm remaining implacable. I find that is the moment, perhaps, where is the most operatically dramatic in the whole Requiem. This kind of ambivalence, ambiguity, and then becomes contradiction, and it becomes a desire to almost break away these two. Subdominant with the soloist. No more extroverted, introverted. Very few and needing so not to exaggerate fermatas in this piece. And the fermatas could be making it heavier than it is. It doesn't need to be heavy, it's already deep, it's profound, it's meaningful, it's intense. And sometimes when you have like a fermata, the harmonization of the chorale ending of the psalm, of the Pie Jesu, you feel like you could stay longer there to conclude, because the verb is there before the sound, and when the sound is melodizing the verb, then the word becomes meaning, and the meaning gives us even more meaning through the music of the word and the music of the music combined, and you feel like you have the time to absorb that in the chorale setting. And here at the end I added this for the piano writing. Fermata, because I want to have the audacity to hope that this instrument, which is not made for long decay, can be in fact prevailing over the harmonization 5/4, 7/1 in minor, and all that on a single D in one breath, which you took your breath and then you release it very slowly. I tried not to exaggerate in my interpretations the amount of fermatas, because they are a good effect but sometimes overused. It's difficult to define, depends on the acoustics. If it's a church, if it's a resonant hall, you have even more to play with that coating of the acoustic within what you bring out with your articulation, your interpretation, your intention in the sound projection, and the pedal that can by itself artificially prolong the decay before the decay inevitably comes, and it never does, but never feels like it would if you think that it's always bringing you further, which is already from the beginning this long D that holds forever, while the choir sings the Requiem Eterna in just repeated triads, in the complete simplicity and austerity of the just minor triad, which on top of it has the resonance of the harmonics that overlap, but acoustically only happens in very resonant acoustics, like 10 seconds or 8 seconds in acoustics in some big cathedrals. You would hear the order of the natural of the harmonics. But in the piano you don't hear it, and the acoustic here is too dry in this room. But perhaps he didn't think of it, but of course it would have been unthinkable in major. Unless a kind of Hosanna. Oh, again, how did I even dare do that? Mademoiselle Boulanger would not be very happy with me trying to belittle like that in a cheesy way Gabrielle Fauré, her maître. So all good things coming to an end. After we went through these different stages of our hope, faith, and despair, and elevation, and drama, and acceptance, comes the ultimate moment of the seventh movement and last movement of the Requiem, the In Paradisum, with a single voice over harp and organ. This time the ostinato has risen on the top without downbeats, so it's even more heavenly light. 2, 3, it's a 16th note rest on each beat. It's constantly lighter and flying over, it's like angelic, and the accompaniment of the harmonies avoids the leading tone. We are here on pentatonic, 6, 5, 1. There's no, very little, almost none, but most of the time is just beyond the tension and release, beyond the tonality, beyond the modality. It's just an ostinato of 1, 6, 5, 1, which 6 is anyway a passing tone, but anyway, it doesn't matter what it is. What it is luminous, is enlightened, is peaceful and hopeful and sad, because you feel like you've reached the end of the different emotional stages through which you accept and reject and make your own through faith or through just generosity of love, which is both, in both cases. This universality of the message, I think, is way beyond only what it is by itself for its utility as a requiem. And on the piano, because it's disconnected from the words, disconnected from the choir, of course it lacks it. I don't pretend it's better, far from there. I think it's different, but I think because it doesn't have the words, and because it suggested that, of course, it doesn't have the voices either. So what's left, right? The spirit? Oh, that's a bit too cheesy to say. No, I think that by disconnecting it from its essence, it becomes, in fact, really the essence. And you hear the harmonic colorization and the mood and the elevation and the spirit and the... I think you're just brought to a more deeper, at least for me, that's how I feel it, and I try to bring it to the audience when I perform it, is a sense of wellness. After all, this is where we are now, in Paradisum. this open third in major, the emotion brings so many personal memories of Mademoiselle Boulanger's funeral, and the emotion of how much she loved this melodic line before she died, as she transmitted it to me through her being, and I made wrong notes. But be it, it's my finitude, it's my humanity. I am not proud of it, but I'm sorry for it, while I got over emotional. And that is not easy to do, to keep it away, but important to learn how to. One day perhaps I might. Meanwhile, the words that come to mind are the words of Françoise Gervais, with whom Mademoiselle Boulanger was very connected. Mademoiselle Boulanger and Françoise Gervais knew each other way when the one was a student of the other, and Mademoiselle Gervais told us, when I asked her to present Fauré to my students many summers ago, many moons ago, she said, "Vous savez, Fauré, c'est mon pays." She said, "Fauré is my country." And I think I can say, le Requiem de Fauré, c'est mon pays.